It's fair to say that I'm having a bit of a dilemma. Was a casualty. Is wobbling. Severe gouges, oily. Right, it's time for me to bring you guys up to speed. I've been doing some wiring. Extremely overkill. There's not quite enough room for it. So the saga of this junk has had yet another chapter. Loads of you guys have been in touch recently to ask how I'm getting on with polishing the errors out of the recent Rattle Can Hero paint job that I did on Heidi, my hearing aid beige Mk2 Escort. Well, the truth is I haven't even started yet. After the endless hours of prep work that went in before that paint job, I've decided to have a bit of a break from bodywork. But I have been busy elsewhere on the car, and I will bring you guys up to date with that later on in the video, including showing you a bit of a disaster that I've had. I've also been cracking on with some more bits here at home, which I'll show you later on. But right now, I'm going to get myself round to the garage here at home, where I'm currently storing Esther, my Mk2 Escort, because at the back of that garage is the engine that will be, hopefully temporarily, going into Heidi very soon. It's fair to say that I'm having a bit of a dilemma with this engine. On one hand, it makes around 160 horsepower, which I proved in Maud, my old Mk2 Escort, is just about enough to have the kind of fun that I wanted to have in Maud and that I'm planning to have in Heidi. But on the other hand, this engine is a bit tired. It makes about 120 psi of compression across all 4 cylinders. Granted, it's not as tired as the ST170 lump that's currently in Esther, which only makes 100 psi across all 4 cylinders, but it is tired. So some people would say that I should rebuild this before I throw it in any car, but I do have plans to fit a very different type of engine to Heidi at some point in the future. So I don't want to dive too much into doing bits on this engine if it's hopefully only going to be a temporary engine, but it is tired. So I need to find a balance. One thing I have already done for this engine is repaint the engine mounts, which were looking really rusty. The only reason I bothered is because I was painting some other bits black at the time. So that's one thing that's going to make this thing look a bit better. But yeah, in general, it is looking really tatty. I mean, part of me wants to get these brackets for the alternator re-zinc plated. This one's looking pretty bad, but I'm not going to dive into doing anything like that. There is one thing that I definitely need to replace, and that's at least one of these bike carb trumpets. A few months ago now, this engine basically fell off the trolley when I was trying to move it around, and yeah, I managed to lift it back onto the trolley, but this trumpet was a casualty. Now, when I look on eBay, I can never find these trumpets for sale. I've seen these sort of retaining things for sale, but this one actually looks undamaged. I just need the trumpet itself, or, you know, possibly a whole set. Yeah, this one's a little bit bent up as well. If there is anyone watching this video that happens to have some CBR 900 bike card trumpets, please do get in touch. My email address is in the description. But yeah, other than that, this thing will definitely be getting an oil change, but there's definitely one thing I want to remove to inspect, and that's the clutch. Now, this engine still has an unsprung rally super heavy duty friction plate, which hasn't broken as far as I know yet. And yeah, I'm hoping that that clutch plate in there will still be usable, but we'll have to see. Also, I have been thinking I should remove the flywheel to see if I can see if the seal behind there, the main seal, has potentially been leaking or not. And I kind of decided that I wasn't going to bother removing the flywheel. But today I noticed an issue, which is an issue I had to deal with Esther's ST170 as well. Basically, this bracket here that holds the crank sensor, as you can see, is wobbling. It's not this nut here that's loose, that's holding the sensor into the bracket. It's the bracket yeah, where it's held in to the back of the block. It's that Torx bit, like an Torx Allen key bolt. So you can't get to it with the flywheel on. So that means I'm going to have to remove the flywheel from this engine anyway. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier with regards to deciding what to do and what not to do whilst this engine is out, it's worth noting that Heidi is going to be way more easy to work on than Maud was. I've purposely made the car so that it's easier to remove the gearbox. I've purposely made it so that it's easier to remove the engine. So that's another reason why I didn't necessarily need to remove the flywheel now to try and determine whether the rear main seal was leaking, for instance, because it will be super easy to bang the gearbox off and deal with any issues like that when the engine is fitted to the car. But as I say, now that I've noticed this issue, the flywheel is going to have to come off. First to come off is the clutch, and we'll have a closer look at that in a minute. The ARP flywheel bolts require a 19mm 12-sided socket, but I've only got 6-sided ones here. A 21mm one does grip the bolts, but it spins when I try to remove them. My ring spanner does go on the bolts properly, so with a bar on the front crank pulley and with help from my trusty persuader, I was able to loosen the bolts. Then I was able to remove them with the 21mm socket and the gun, and then I was able to get to the crank sensor bolt, which I removed, then added some Kent Europe thread lock to before reinstalling and over tightening the bolt back into the block. Hopefully it'll stay put this time. It's time to have a look at the flywheel, which is definitely showing signs of wear, but I'm happy to chuck this back on the engine and send it. The Helix Motorsport unsprung paddle clutch looks like it will handle a few more clutch kicks, so that will live on to tell another story too. The same can't be said for the pressure plate though, which has some severe gouges out of the face of it, so that will be going in the scrap. Yeah, no, this is actually hanging. I can feel quite a bad divot sort of thing in this, so that's a shame. It looks like I'm definitely going to have to get another one of these, which I'm worried about because I've had problems in the past with certain covers not being compatible with certain friction plates. And I know you are supposed to change the whole clutch when you change a clutch, but yeah, I'm cheap and I like to try and replace just the friction plates when they wear out. But this time it looks like the friction plate will go again, but this cover, I'm pretty certain, definitely will not. All right, so I need to have a quick look at this Type 9 gearbox, which will be bolted to the ST170 engine when it goes in Heidi, because it looks like we've got quite a major oil leak. There's actually a massive stain on the floor over there. Now this is a mildly modified Type 9 gearbox. It has a longer first gear in it and it has the upgraded lay shaft bearing, but it's not straight cut or anything like that, and all the other gears apart from first are standard. It was actually rebuilt by HPE years ago, and it's probably been the most reliable part in, well, either of my Escorts really. Anyway, as I say, we do have an oil leak to deal with, but I think this might actually just be the top lid gasket that's leaking, because any signs of a leak are only up here. You know, all this around here seems absolutely dry. Now, there is a gasket that's supposed to go between the gearbox and the bell housing, but I don't think that's desperately necessary, but I'm not 100% sure. I think there might be some sort of rod that comes out of the gearbox, maybe when it goes into fifth. Again, I'm not 100% sure. This gearbox has an aftermarket quick release RS style bell housing, so the gearbox is bolted to the bell housing with these Allen key bolts rather than the bell housing being bolted to the gearbox. With the bell housing off, I confirmed my theory about the rod that pokes out the front of the gearbox, but with the shifter fitted, I realised that the rod actually pokes out in every gear except second and fourth, and even in neutral. There's a divot or a blind hole in the bell housing to make space for that rod, and it's here where I believe the oil has been leaking out. If I remember rightly, people do miss out those gaskets, which isn't a massive deal when you're driving the car, because the oil wouldn't really be able to slosh around enough to come out of that hole. But when you're standing your gearbox up like I have, then yeah, that's why it's leaked out of that hole. But essentially, I think I'm going to chuck a gasket on here before I put this back together, and I think I'll throw on a top lid gasket as well, just to rule that out. And yeah, we should be good to go with this mildly modified Type 9 5-speed gearbox. And I think I'm actually going to have a go at making those gaskets rather than just buying them. They are peanuts to buy, but what's the fun in that? Removing the top lid from the gearbox is just a case of removing a few bolts. The gasket looks like it hasn't failed, but I'm going to replace it anyway. It looks like there's no teeth missing off of any of the gears inside, so hopefully this Type 9 will live a long life in hiding. I took the bell housing to a local jet wash to clean all the oil off it, and then it was time to start making some homemade gaskets. I covered my fingers in guide coat powder, then I laid some paper over the bell housing and rubbed my fingers on it to create an impression of the gasket, which I then cut out with scissors. I drew around it and the old top lid gasket onto some gasket paper, then I set about making the holes in the bell housing gasket, doing one at a time, starting with the hole for that rod. Once both gaskets were cut out and I was happy with them, I used a pin to make sure the breather hole was clear on the gearbox top lid. Then it was time for reassembly, starting with the top lid, and once that was screwed on, I reattached the bell housing to the box. And there it is, one complete, hopefully now not leaky, Type 9 gearbox ready for Heidi. Alright, it's time for me to bring you guys up to speed with everything I've been up to around here at the other garage on Heidi. And I've basically been cracking on with some fuel plumbing, which I've had a little bit of a nightmare with, and I've been doing some wiring. And I've been trying to do a much tidier job of the wiring on this car than some of you might have seen me do wiring on the other cars in the past. As a result, there's a lot of wires that are still left too long because the parts that those wires plug into aren't fitted to the car yet, because yeah, I'm trying to make all the wires just as long as they need to be, and I'm trying to make sure that there's no extra wires anywhere. So this is still a work in progress, but let me show you how far I've got. So I'll start at the front of the car and work my way back. And as you can see, I've now got the plug and play loom installed for the ME100 ECU. That's obviously the ECU that I removed from Maud when I took her apart. And don't forget, if you're after an ECU for your car, there's a wide range available on my website at marcushayesuk.com, and feel free to drop me an email if you've got any questions. Anyway, to run the plug and play loom, I did have to make this massive hole in the bulkhead. And I did unfortunately hit the paint, but I'm not bothered. I will put a grommet in there at some point. But yeah, once the engine's installed, I'll be able to plug everything in with regards to the ECU. The other end of the ECU wiring isn't actually wired up yet, but I'll get to that in a minute. Now, obviously, because this car was a cross-flow powered car, I need to extend the alternator wires from around here to around here, where the alternator is now going to be on the ST170 engine. And yeah, these wires have been left far too long, and I can cut them to the correct length once the engine is installed. It's worth noting that these red wires that I've used to extend the alternator wiring, they are extremely overkill. And yeah, I'm not really fussed about how this loom looks in this car. I'm trying to make this car so that it's easy to work on in the future if I ever have to. So I'm not going to be wrapping the loom with loom tape or anything like that. I may put some plastic sort of corrugated stuff over it if it really annoys me, but my main focus is that if I ever get any issues, I'll be able to easily find out where those issues are without having to unwrap the loom. So yeah, it doesn't bother me that these wires are too thick. You know, it's all going to run under the radiator and that anyway, so it's not going to be that bad at all. Over here, I've got the wire that is going to be powering the relays, and again, this has been left too long. This will have a ring put on it and it will be attached to the positive side of the battery. These wires here, this wire here is going to go to the coolant temperature sensor, and these ones here go to the fan switch. So yeah, they're for the fan, that's for the coolant temperature sensor. And I've already got two wires going through here with a grommet which go to the actual fan itself. Yeah, these wires here will be hooking up to the fan switch and the coolant sensor in the water rail. So again, once the engine's fitted, I can cut them to the perfect length and tidy those up. But for now, they're just extra long. But yeah, that wire that's powering the relays obviously goes with the rest of the loom and into the cockpit, and I've got my relays wired up on the passenger side kick panel, as you can see here. But before we talk about this lot, let's have a look at this, which again was fitted to Maud. This will be painted beige, of course, at some point. But yeah, I've been wiring up this switch panel, which includes a push button start. Now, originally, the way the loom is wired is you've got this red wire that goes to your barrel. When you turn the first click of the key, that then sends power down this black and yellow wire to power the whole car, basically. It branches off to the stalks and whatnot here, and then it did carry on through the loom. But I've cut it back, and the wire that goes to the loom is now coming off the back of this switch, because the way I want it is you turn the key, then you put this switch on, which then powers up the rest of the car, and then obviously this is the push button start, and then these switches are for the fuel pump and the ECU. So yeah, the way I've got it is that on the first click, the current goes down this wire into the back of this switch. Then I've got another wire coming out of the back of that switch. One goes to the push button so that you can start the engine. But yeah, the rest of it then goes down the loom as it would have done when this wasn't fitted. And then the black and red wire would have been the feed to the starter motor when you put it in the starter position on the key. But I've cut that off because I want that to now be powered when you push this button. So the wire coming out of the back of that button is hooked up to the rest of that black and red wire, which goes to the starter motor. Now, with regards to these relays, and for those that don't understand what a relay does, there's loads of videos on YouTube that talk about that. But essentially, you're separating the power coming from your battery and going to your accessories from the circuit that triggers the power to go to those accessories, if that makes sense. So I've got one relay for the fuel pump, one for the ECU, and one for the electric fan. And I want these relays to be triggered when you turn the key to the first click. So one of the wires coming out the back of this switch here, this brown wire connects to the white wires on these relays, which triggers the relay to turn on. Now, on the earth side of that trigger side of the relay, sorry if I'm using the wrong terminology, I've got the switches that actually activate those accessories. So for the fuel pump and ECU, I've got these switches, and for the fan, I've got the fan switch. And the wires for the fan switch, as I just showed you, are still, too long, and I'll deal with that when I actually get the engine fitted. So that's the trigger side of the relay, if you like. But the actual power side of the relay, where the power comes from the battery and goes to those accessories, the red wire that I showed you in the engine bay hooks up to these red wires to send power through the relay, and then the blue wires on these relay plugs are the wire that actually takes the current to the accessories. So you've got this blue wire here, which hooks up to this red wire, which runs all the way into the boot, because that's the feed for the fuel pump. And then this blue wire on the second relay, which is hooked up to this orange wire, which runs all the way along the loom here. And I've got that here, and that is going to hook up to the red wires on my plug and play loom for the ECU. So that's the feed that actually powers the ECU. There are black wires on the ECU loom as well, which will need to go to the body. But yeah, I'll hook that up over there when the time comes. And then the blue wire coming out of the third relay, which is for the electric fan, obviously goes through the bulkhead to the electric fan, and that's one of the wires that I showed you in the engine bay a minute ago. So yeah, I hope that all makes sense. I hope I've got it right. I haven't tested anything yet, but yeah, time will tell. But yeah, until I've got this loom as it's going to be, with the heater fitted and with the switch panel fitted, yeah, I don't want to finalise the length of the plug and play loom. I need to decide how that's going to pass to the ECU, which will be velcroed on the switch panel. So that's why I haven't finalised that. But I have finalised this switch panel because yeah, I know that it's going to sit roughly there. There's definitely enough length. And it's worth noting, with all this wiring that I'm doing on the car, again, with the view to make the car easier to work on in the future, I'm adding multi-plugs everywhere. So for instance, if I needed to remove this switch panel, you know, I don't need to start undoing things here. I can leave it all hooked up, and I've got a little multi-plug here, which is for these two switches. And I was going to put a multi-plug on the wires for these ones as well, but they're thicker wires, and these little multi-plugs aren't really for thicker wires. So I've put bullet connectors on them instead, and I've sort of made them color coded with different colors of heat shrink, you know, like for instance, this is blue, this is blue. So if I do ever take it apart, you just unplug that, unplug the bullet connectors, and I could remove this switch panel out of the way. Because I've had the problem in the past where I've had to remove certain things that I've wired up myself to my cars, and then I have to like remember what wire does what, because I've just used black wires for everything, for example. So yeah, I'm just trying to make this car a lot easier to work on if I have to. All right, so into the boot, and I've got this bracket mounted exactly how it was mounted in Maud, except I've actually put riv nuts in the floor of this so that it can just be bolted in. I've just got a few Allen key bolts holding it in at the moment. This will need to come back out again. And the wiring has basically followed the rest of the loom all the way along here, and it pokes out here. And again, I've got a multi-plug on it. So if I ever need to remove the fuel pump or the fuel pump bracket, it's going to be way easier. This is obviously the wire that comes out of the relay to power the fuel pump, and that hooks up to this wire, which is the power feed for the fuel pump. And then you've got an earth as well. Yeah, this needs to basically attach to the body of the fuel pump, and then it needs to go to ground. So I've got both those wires going through a multi-plug. This will be hooked up to the body of the fuel pump, as I say. This other end of it will just be hooked up to the stud that will be there, which is the stud for the rear lights, and then that will complete that circuit. And if I ever need to remove the fuel pump, I can just undo this multi-plug, unbolt the bracket, and then pull it out. So now we're talking about the fuel pump. That brings me nicely on to the fuel pump plumbing that I've been trying to do. Now, first thing worth noting is I've got this original type fuel pipe now hooked up. It's all attached to the chassis leg underneath. And yeah, basically I need a rubber hose. This one here, I think, yeah, will eventually be hooked up to that. But I still need to sort the pipe that goes from the bottom of the fuel tank and hooks up to this pipe. Or it might be the other way around, but you get my drift. But I've had a problem with the fuel tank, and that's why it's not fitted. And here is said fuel tank. Now, initially, I removed this from the car just so that I could pour some thinners into it, shake it about, and then pour the thinners out, just to make sure there's no debris inside from the bodywork that I've been doing. But when I was trying to pour the thinners out, I noticed that some of it was coming out of here because there is a slight crack in the tank here. So it's got a hole in it, unfortunately. But ironically, this area of the tank was actually causing me problems. So I'm not sure if that's caused the hole, but let me explain. Basically, that bit there is right where this bracket is. And essentially, this fuel tank is a really tight fit in this car. And I think that's because of some of the welding that's been done down here. So it's just like there's not quite enough room for it. Now, I got round it by just basically bending this bracket up a little bit. Then you can get the tank in, and then you sort of have to force the bracket back in its place before you can put the bolt in. And this basically scrapes along here, so it's putting pressure here. So I'm not sure if that would have caused this hole, but it's definitely not helping the situation. So yeah, I've got a hole in the fuel tank. And annoyingly, I did paint up a spare fuel tank, but I sold it on eBay. But it did go to Russell Lord, so it was cool to meet him when he came to collect the tank. Now, I was actually looking for another one of these fuel tanks, but I think I've got a solution for this problem, and I'll go into that in another video, probably the next video. But one thing I am going to do is I'm going to chop a little bit off the bottom of this next time I get the grinder out. I think it's this bit here that rubs, yeah. Looks like the paint's been rubbed off. So yeah, I've only got to cut off a little bit. You know, I'll leave as much strength in it as I can, and then that shouldn't cause me a problem when I go to refit the tank once I've solved that issue. But in terms of sorting out a pipe to go from the bottom of the fuel tank to then come into the boot to feed the pump and the regulator, I've bought some bits because I didn't have the fittings that go in the bottom of this fuel tank. I'll show you properly once I put this together, but essentially I've got this fitting that goes into the bottom of the fuel tank, and then I can make an AN line to bring the feed into the boot. So I bought a couple of AN fittings off of Amazon. This is a bulkhead fitting essentially to make the pipe go through the boot floor. And I need to get some of this, but Teflon, because these AN fittings I've bought are for Teflon, and this is not Teflon. This is the Teflon stuff, but this is the wrong size. So I'll be making an AN line to feed the pump in the boot. I've been cracking on with a couple of bits here at home, including one which was set to be yet another untied loose end, until my good friend Dale very kindly lent me his rivet gun. Huge thanks and a shout out to you, Dale, if you're watching. But before we get on to that particular job, which is in the garden, I'll just give you guys a brief look at the latest pedal box that I've restored. These things look so cool with all the zinc plated goodies in them. They take a lot of effort to do, but the results are amazing. Anyway, I'll meet you in the garden to show you something that I've redone yet again. So the saga of this absolutely junk fiberglass bonnet has had yet another chapter, because I've stripped off the rollered on satin black paint, and now I've given it a coat of satin black out of a rattle can. It still looks ropey, but it definitely looks a bit better than the roller job. And this bonnet has had far too much of my time. It would have been so much easier to just buy a brand new fiberglass bonnet and paint that up, and then it would have looked maybe half decent. But this will definitely be good enough to go on the car until I get a carbon fibre one. So that brings us to the end of this video, where there are a ton of loose ends untied, but this video is well overdue, so I thought I'd just show you where I've got to. And I've already started taking steps to tie off some of those loose ends. I've had some bits through the post, I've got some bits that are still on their way, and the next time that I'm working on Heidi, which might be the next video on this channel, I'm pretty sure I'll be able to tie off some of those loose ends, and I reckon I'll be able to get the engine in the bay, which is always an awesome milestone of any project. We are now a week away from the Ford show at Santapod, which means I definitely need to get all these stand passes sent out to everyone. If you're one of the people that successfully booked a club stand ticket for the Ford show, definitely drop me an email with your address ASAP, and I'll get your stand pass or passes sent out to you. But yeah, really looking forward to that event next weekend, and I'm planning to take Esther, so I need to dig her out the garage and make sure that she's going to be all right for the trip there, and potentially some runs down the quarter mile. So that's all I've got for this video. As always, massive thanks to everyone who's tuned in. Do check all the links in the description to follow me elsewhere on the internet. Give this video a thumbs up if you haven't already, and definitely subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. My email address is down in the description for anyone who wants to contact me. Huge thanks as always to my patrons for your ongoing support. But other than that, until next time, thanks for watching.